Everyone to CG seminar number 182, and today race, ethnicity, cultural capital and the lived experience in international higher education. And there's a lot of literature on the experience of Asian students in the United States and other English speaking countries, but not nearly as much about the experience of African students, and that's where we'll be today. It's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Solomon Zewolde to our webinar again, or he's returning to the webinar because he's been an active participant in previous discussions. Let me tell you that Solomon is a part-time lecturer at the University of East London and at UCL in London as well, which is where we first met, I think. He holds a PhD in race and higher education from the Institute of Education at UCL. And prior to that, he's been an educator, a researcher, and an academic administrator in both public and private universities in Ethiopia. You'll hear more about his interests and his capabilities, I'm sure, in the presentation. Let me take you through the webinar protocols before we start. Remember that the webinar is being recorded, so your contributions to the online discussion will be on YouTube within 48 hours or so. We also post on our website a transcript of the chat function that's created during the webinar. Now, please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to speak or ask a question. We don't mind you having a video on, but there's no need to have your video on during the normal course of the webinar. But please turn on when you're asking a question. We recommend using the speaker view setting in Zoom so you can more clearly see who is talking at any given time. Now, to ask a question, and we really welcome questions, Q&A is an important part of the webinar. Put your question in writing in the chat. Send it to everyone or send it to me. Probably to everyone is better because then everyone can see what you're interested in and they might start to talk to you even before you go onto camera. I compose the Q&A on the basis of what comes in through the chat. And I'll give you a warning when you're asked to, before you're asked to speak. When you are asked to speak, you unmute yourself, most important, switch on your video, and then when you come in, state your name and where you are from, and then ask your question or make your statement. So at this point, let me finish the housekeeping and hand over to Solomon. Welcome, Solomon.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. So I'll make a start. Let me share my PowerPoint. No.
Give it another try.
Yeah,
yep,
I think
there we are.
Yeah, this one, yeah. So
yeah, all perfect.
Yeah, welcome everyone, and thank you very much. I will make a start immediately. I have a few PowerPoints, so if I don't finish them, I've already told Trevor to put them on the website and people can have a look. Yeah, so race, ethnicity, cultural capital, and lived experience in international higher education is the title of my presentation. So I would briefly introduce my study before I go into the details. So what I did in this study is I explored the lived experience of Black African international students from sub-Saharan Africa. I will refer hereafter as BAIS. So what I did was I employed qualitative research design, and I interviewed 21 Black African international students studying in 10 different universities that are located in 8 different English cities. So I explored their stories through the theoretical lens of Bourdieu and critical race theory. So I found that there is a requirement to possess the cultural capital demanded by the new educational environment, and this is enmeshed with the students' racialization as the unprepared and undeserving other. So I hope my study, the findings of my study, will add voice to the need to reimagine, the current depoliticized and unproblematized depiction of international education, especially in the Western world. That would be the structure of my presentation. I would say a few words about background, look at review, theoretical framework, methodology, findings, and if I have time, conclusion and implications. So This all started when I was inspired by two personal experiences following my relocation here in the United Kingdom. Okay, that triggered my interest in minority students' experience in UK higher education. So my exploratory look at the literature showed me that despite increases in access to ethnic minorities have very different educational experience, both experience and outcomes. So I looked at some literature which says that the UK higher education landscape is actually raced, classed, gendered, and underpinned by middle class values. So the white middle class culture is actually disguised as neutral and objective academic culture. And so many scholars say this is alienating to home Black and minority ethnic students, forget international students. And the same with attainment. As far as attainment is concerned, two pieces of work caught my attention. One is by Broquet and Nicolas, and the other one, which I did not cite here, is by HEFKI, the Higher Education Funding Agency. Both studies sponsored by the Department of Education and had a sample of over 50,000 students. And both had the same conclusion, that ethnicity matters and contributes a lot to the attainment gap, especially between white and Black students. Okay, then I just said, okay, then if this is alienating to home Black ethnic minority students, it would be fascinating to explore the experience of Black African international students, probably who are quite distant, by comparison from the dominant white middle class culture in UK higher education. So what would it be like for them to study in the UK? So I started looking at the literature. So the proportion of BAIS in the UK, I took a 5-year comparison here. So in 2014-15, we had like 35,000, which was 8% of total UK non-UK domiciled, international students. In 2017-18, 5 years later, a slight decrease, but still 6.1%. Research literature on Black African international students is relatively limited, even on international students in general, but there is a dearth of literature on Black African international students, and the available literature focuses on academic challenge, such as problems of language proficiency, academic literacy, and to some extent on critical thinking skills. And much research is informed by a very deficit view, which tends to place the responsibility for change and adaptation squarely on the students. And it does not critically look at the societal and educational conditions under which these students are placed. Yeah. So UK studies, specifically UK studies on international students, rarely consider the role of race and ethnicity in shaping international students' lived experience. I've actually contacted personally HESA, the Higher Education Statistics Authority. They do not collect race and ethnicity information on international education, only on nationality. And they treat international students as undifferentiated mass despite significant diversity in the student body. So as a result, they shun the role of race and racism and frame their findings as adjustment or cultural problems. And some of the authors are here. And this is very surprising that issues of race and racism do not come up in UK studies of experience of international students, because there is a significant evidence of racial discrimination in the United Kingdom, both in society and education in general. So even a cursory glance, we would tell you that the higher education sector is highly racialized. Top university administrative positions remain a white enclave. Chancellor, even down to department heads, only 15 Black academics, at least in 2015, and only 85 of the UK's nearly 90,000 professors are Black, 17 are women, and Black women and men achieve the lowest percentage of first-class degrees compared to 18.3% for white women and 19.4% for white men. Yes, UK research and scholarship also compound racial discrimination with class-based discrimination, okay, to avoid discussing and analyzing race and racism. So they use colorblind ideology to evade and deny the role of racism in educational experiences, and some scholars attest to this. And researchers usually minimize racism reporting the research findings using assorted explanation, what Harper 2012 calls them assorted explanations. Okay, like instead of calling them racist, they would call them alienating, hostile, marginalizing, chilly, harmful. Yeah, there is that tendency. There is that tendency to do that. Yeah, okay. This would bring me to my theoretical framework. So as I said, I use critical race theory and Bourdieu in combination. So I used the theoretical tools that I used to explore issues that I believed shaped the overall lived experience of BAIS include race, ethnicity, racism, culture, acceptance, capitals, and attainment. And I took theoretical tools from Bourdieu like cultural capital, field, habitus, and the hysteresis of habitus. And conceptual tools from CRT include the permanence of racism, the voice of people of color, and CRT's insistence on intersectionality was also very, very important. So Bourdieu says educational system assumes possession of cultural capital. This is one of my very favorite quotes from Bourdieu. So Bourdieu thinks that the education system, doing away with what it should give very clearly and explicitly, but demands the same things that every student has that. And this is especially manifested in the form of linguistic and cultural competence, okay, which is only transmitted during their upbringing. Okay, cultural capital and habitus are only functional only in relation to a field, but the educational environment is taken for granted when Black African international students come here. It's assumed that it's a level playing field when it is not. Okay, because capitals are valued differently in different fields. So any disparity in attainment and lived experience, researchers try to explain that as difference in individual ability and capacity. And I challenge that. So I used concepts of capital to explore what types of cultural capital BAIS come with, what capital is valued in UK higher education, and how this shapes their lived experiences. So BAIS encounter an education system that does not value their cultural capital, but values the cultural capital of all other groups of students, especially home students. I also used the concept of habitus and hysteresis of habitus. So habitus is a very powerful concept which can be used to understand student adaptation in higher education, because it allows us to, to think and analyze who enjoys a very felicitous encounter and who feels strained or, faces an infelicitous encounter. So the fit between individual habitus and field, which Bourdieu calls ontological complicity. So when there is fit between habitus and field, that facilitates transition and then adjustment. So when BAIS move, Black African international students move to a new HE field, hysteresis of habitus is another important concept, which Bourdieu defines as habitus encounters an environment that's too different from the one it is objectively adjusted to. So I used hysteresis of habitus and habitus to look at adaptation and what that lag between their habitus, so to speak, African habitus and the new, what the habitus, the new education, UK education field demands, helped me and helped me to understand and explain some of their challenges. And one problem they had was that there isn't one global higher education field. So transfer of capital, from elsewhere to the UK is not simply an option, it's not possible. But finally, I said Bourdieuian lens is inadequate because Bourdieuian lens wants to analyze experience based on possession or lack thereof of capitals, and to use that only, to use possession of capital or the hysteresis of habitus to explain ethnic difference in outcome and experience, it was seriously challenged as a deficit-laden view, and Tara Yosso comes in that area, and I completely agree with her. So the UK HE field, it undervalues Black African international students' capital. The curriculum negates their experience, and they are racialized others and less capable beings. And I'm arguing this blurs the line between what Bourdieu suggests is class-based domination and what might actually be racial domination. So I therefore argued that Bourdieu's theoretical framework is simply insufficient to fully explore and understand the lived experience of Black African international students. So hence CRT comes here. So CRT, critical race theory, provides a framework that we can use to explore the social realities of racialized groups, such as my research participants. And especially I used its recognition of the permanence of racism, the legitimization of the voice and experience of people of color, in my case, Black students, and its insistence on intersectional analysis was very, very useful. So in methodology, I considered using quant, but surveys usually tend to homogenize experience. They target big numbers and they try to come up with grand narratives, which, and making deeper and nuanced, they have their own value, but they make deeper and nuanced understanding very difficult. So, but I was interested in counter narrative, not in grand narrative. I'm looking for a narrative that challenges the grand narrative. So I left quant and I used qualitative research design with CRT framework. Okay, so, and there is a good reason for that, because traditional qualitative research, especially in education, has been criticized for treating race as an epiphenomenon. So to speak, epiphenomenizing and de-emphasizing race. That's what traditional qualitative research has been criticized for, and they resort to class and gender-based explanations for issues related to poor and negative lived experience of Black and minority students in higher education. So CRT, I thought, would solve that problem by foregrounding race and ethnicity. So my research design involved audio recording of in-depth interviews, okay, a contextual information sheet where I used to secure some demographic information and also put some observation how the interview went. So I did field work, a pilot focus group discussion to get a sense of the group, which are much younger than I am and come from very, very different cultures. So I did some pilot interviews, which helped me to widen the scope of the research question. So the first time I went to do the field work, the pilot work, I just wanted to look at the experience of assessment and feedback in UK higher education. Okay, and that completely changed, because in every answer they give to me, race is implicated in everything, in how they are assessed, in how they are perceived as students. So I never even mentioned race when I first went and meet them. So main study involved, as I said before, 21 Black African international students from 10 universities located in 8 English different cities. Recruitment, okay, this was the criteria for me. They have to be a national of sub-Saharan African English-speaking country. I didn't include French-speaking countries. I didn't include North Africa or white Africans, because there is the literature established that white Africans or Asians Africans have a very different experience from Black Africans. So that was one criteria, identifying oneself as Black or Black African, enrolled as international undergraduate student in a UK university, be on a tier 4 student visa, have had his or her secondary education in his or her home country, and should be in second or third year of study. I wanted that so that they have enough experience to relate to me. So during recruitment, no mention of race or experience of racism was made in the call for research participants, to avoid the tendency of recruiting only participants who have had experienced racism. So the ad simply said, what is it like for for you to study at your university? If you are happy to share this experience, please contact me. Okay, so I contacted students from over 20 unis through their National Student Society Facebook page, emailed over 60 students individually. So finally, this is what I got: 12 males and 9 females who met the criteria and expressed the willingness to participate in the study. So students come from different types of institutions, but broadly speaking, 12 come from Russell Group and 9 come from non-Russell Group. Okay, and these are very prestigious and less prestigious universities, so to speak. So my data analysis, in a very highly iterative process, I did the coding in 2 parts. Okay, first is a priori codes followed by a more explicit theory-led indexing of the data. Okay, and second, I did a data-driven coding and arrived at my final codes to do my analysis. So I also reflected on my positionality. I accept that realities can be plural, and I'm making no claims that my participants' experience represent the only truth as far as the lived experience of African international students is concerned. There can be multiple versions of lived experience depending on context and individual difference. And I was more interested in what, in how my participants' stories said, how it affected how it shaped their lives, rather than in the veracity of what they had to say. And my analysis and interpretation of the story was also aided and also constrained by my theoretical framework, by my insider status, and by my capacity as a researcher to represent the voice of the research participants. I acknowledge that. So findings, really four major areas I would like to touch on. I'm trying to go a bit faster. Okay, findings. Okay, Black African international students face extra adjustment challenge due to an infelicitous encounter with the UK higher education field. Okay, there is a need to adapt to a new societal culture, the loss of their social capital, which is at times exacerbated by poor institutional support. So they feel overwhelmed. Okay, they experience greater level of stress and difficulty in their transition. Much more than home students, much more than home white students. Okay, in terms of capital, some of the base capitals are more easily and more readily recognized. For example, their entry qualification, which is a form of institutionalized cultural capital, but other forms of capital, are not as readily and easily recognized: linguistic, educational, economic, social, and they are much more unequally distributed among students. And mobility across national border, that's very, very important, removes them from their social capital. So they face loneliness and isolation, difficulty adapting to a new culture, adequacy of institutional support, with a mixed feelings there. So in comparison with home students who largely maintain their social connections, this might have put BAIS in a very disadvantageous position, and thereby reproducing inequalities in lived experience. There are some illustrative quotes I can present here. So as a home student, you don't battle the amount of things that an international student does. You don't battle immigration things, you don't battle visa things, you don't battle high fees, and you don't battle all these different stereotypes, says one of my female students, and fitting in is difficult. So another student says, so the difference about them, home students also, then the lecturers can identify with them. I've never seen a Black lecturer all these 4 years in my class studying law. I didn't see anyone that is Black and that took me to any module. Loneliness and isolation, that was a very, very sad part of the research. So this student is saying that it's a complete change. I spend most of my time in my room. I have no friends. If he was in my country, I can go out and meet anyone, anytime I like. But here it's a different culture, and it's very boring. It's very difficult. I don't have local friends. And the research literature has firmly established that frequent contact for an international student who is a home student aids their adjustment, and that is not happening. Difficulty adapting to a new culture. So personally, for me, the cultural shift has been very huge. You have a very laid-back society here, as opposed to, for example, Kenya, where he has come from, where it's more rigid and is more family value-based. But over here, everyone is for themselves. As an international, you having to adjust that has been one of the biggest challenges. And some feel probably out of habitus. So they say everyone came here with a certain attitude of I have to succeed. It's just me, and I don't care about anybody else. But this student saying I'm used to the idea that succeeding means succeeding together, not just yourself. Okay, this was something I really struggled with. To be honest, it was very hard in my first year. So there's a complete change as far as that's concerned. And this resonates with what Yosso reconceptualized what social capital mean as community cultural wealth. And she says Black students, form associations, show solidarity and support each other. And my participant is clearly missing that here. Institutional support provided, there's mixed feelings about that. Some students in general are very happy with the teaching, despite its newness and unfamiliarity with its methods and delivery. You can see some of the wonderful quotes there. Teaching is engaging, second to none. They explain more, but as people also say, I wasn't quite ready for the teaching, too fast, very fast paced. So it was very intimidating at the beginning. So, and they also say there is poor support for issues that are deemed non-academic, for example, health issues. So if students experience illness, the support was not there. The other area of my finding was race, ethnicity, and attainment. Research on attainment gap in the UK, or even in the US, elsewhere, even in Australia, they routinely pinpoint the racialized nature of the white-black attainment gap in higher education, but fail to even consider if racism contributes to the gap. Okay, that was one of the things that really motivated me. But there are few scholars, who, like me, pointed out this. For example, Shurich, if I pronounce that correctly, people of color and those whites who have concluded that white academics are racially biased are correct, because the ways of the dominant group become universalized as measures of merit, hiring criteria, grading standards, predictors of success, correct grammar, appropriate behavior, okay, which are said to be distributed as difference in individual effort and ability when they are not. And Professor Cousin in 2016, much closer, pondered, when teachers behold BME, do they behold to students? And my findings seem to confirm that. So my research participants felt there is perceived racism and discrimination. So a student here says, when we started with the internationals, we were really very committed and we work so hard while most of them were partying and we have to assist them most of the time. And he says, I do not know how the gear changed, at the final stage in this, most of the white students who end up getting the higher class grades. And he says, finally, but I will say this, if I was a white student looking at how hardworking I am, I think I would have gotten a fantastic first. That's what I believe. And this is consistent with the literature on international student experience that says international students are academically, more academically engaged than home students, especially in first year of study. Yeah, so there are people who say they're marked down because of my race. It looks very shocking, but that is very, very strong. There are lots of data on this. So BAIS accounts identified racism and discrimination as one factor shaping their assessment, and also feedback experience, which I haven't touched here, influencing how their work is judged and graded. And my research participants shared things that they experienced themselves and things they experienced vicariously. So this student is telling me there was a Ghanaian student, with him, who was marked down and he applied for a remarking, and okay, the people agreed that he has to pass. He was unfairly. And there are two cases where remarking changes the grades awarded. So there are some evidence to prove to that. Again, another student who feels marked down, and she said, I had to chase her up. Then, after 3 weeks, I succeeded, and then I end up, my mark was moved. Very strong feelings here. It's embedded, it's not clear. For example, there is an opportunity, this student says, that where discretion is involved, then he thinks some white professors favor white students. For example, if you get 69 or 68, so you can see that to give you a first class is discretional. So there is, I think, if they do want to discriminate, there it comes. But it's embedded, hidden, not conspicuous. You can't spot it like that easy, but you can see, like, their own kids easily get first class, the British citizens. Okay, the other area of my finding was experience of racism. So my research participants experienced both overt and covert racism in all kinds of spaces, outside and inside the university. They tried to use some coping mechanisms, to ameliorate and try to diminish the impact that this would have on them. Overt racism, for example, includes being called a racial slur, being told to go back to Africa, racist missile attacks like eggs thrown at them and denigrated because of their culture. Some illustrative quotes here shows that I was walking up the stairs and one of the students inside the university in the school called me hello slave. Okay, and this is a student in my same year. Okay, one of my friends was telling me a story that she was stoned with an egg. She had the hijab on and was walking in the road when a couple of white guys from a car stoned her. Okay, and the vicarious experience of racism. Other quotes for overt racism include the student doing a Christmas job and in the street trying to pitch some sales of something. And then a white guy raised his hand and dismissed me, saying I should go back to where they brought me from. I should go back to Africa, where I come from. I'm not needed here. This resonates with, current discourse of pesky immigrants who move here to take jobs of white British nationals. Some of my friends here that are girls, of course, vicarious experience also here. They were going back to their hostel at night, and apparently a car drove by and white guys stoned them with eggs. Experience of covert racism, assumptions of poor and inferior previous education in Africa. Like this was related and communicated to them in various spaces, ignoring and undervaluing their contributions in seminar classes, being made invisible, being seen as a criminal. So I started attending my seminars in my first year, the seminar groups I was in, where I was the only black person, I felt left out. So you could see the conscious outcasting. So seminar classes are spaces that are much espoused to be, as an opportunity for mixing up, an opportunity for learning. But this is also what is happening. So giving your opinion, they won't take you seriously, but the same point taken up by another white home student will be taken seriously, okay? And they don't feel that you are good enough for suiting the task, okay? And it feels so condescending and annoying, okay? They press your opinion aside. You'll find out that they don't think it's wrong, but they feel high and mighty, okay? And he's not happy about that. Another seminar class, exclusion. There was this girl I worked with in lab practicals. We were working together on something. She just assumed that I was going to mess the practical or something. So she just kept doing everything herself, telling me, don't worry, don't worry. And she did the whole practical herself, and being seen as criminal. So this guy says, when I go for shopping, I realize that they feel suspicious. They put all eyes on me or something like that. So I don't understand why they are doing that. I realize they do this to blacks, unlike the whites. So I was asking myself, why are they doing this to black people? Okay, and this is part of the experience I have here. I don't think universities would like to hear this, that if a black person went for shopping, they put all eyes on him. I feel disrespected because I realize that they are not doing this to white people. So I keep asking myself, why are they doing this to black people? And he says he had a lot of conversations with other black friends, and they all say they have the same problem. Coping mechanisms, they mentioned like joining a co-national space, okay, with students from their countries, ignoring racism. That was another big mechanism. They just ignore it. And none of the racist, even the most violent racism experience are not reported. Resilience, and it's not my struggle. This is what really caught my attention. There is a coping mechanism where they seem to say it's not my struggle. So a student here says, the struggles you have to take here aren't really yours. Okay, they will have issues that they have experienced that you won't have experienced. So you come here, you're not able to like fight those issues the way they are able to fight them. By they is referring to home ethnic minorities, especially home British black students. So he says you'll be a bit upset, but then it's not your struggle because that racism is targeted at indigenous black people. So you are not very intimate about the problem. So there is that lack of connection. Is actually not my struggle. And I didn't like that, but that's what I found out. And fourth major area of my finding was experience of othering. So I tried to make some conceptual distinction between othering and racism. They're highly intertwined concepts, but they have also been othered based on other coded way of talking about race, okay, like stereotypes about Africa mainly. So Black African international students positioned and constructed as others through process of othering that ignores the complexity and subjectivity of their individuality. Okay, they are not, they are perceived unidimensionally. So there was homogenization of their experience identities. They were stereotyped based on the perceived backwardness of Africa. They were exoticized and fetishized. They were excluded and avoided in social spaces. They were othered based on immigration status, othered and discriminated in the labor market. I will show you a few illustrative quotes. Then the worst thing is that is white British people's remark, your country, Africa, I hate it. And this came many, many times. Africa is a continent of like 50 something countries, the largest continent, but they don't know about that. How can you go and mistake that? They don't like it. Okay, stereotyped, for example, sometime on my way to see my auntie in Canal, that is a pseudonym for one of the cities. So Canal is just the name of a city. My Uber driver asked me, "Oh, you Nigerian, do you see animals?" And I'm like, "Yeah, in the zoo, because I only see animals in zoo. We don't have animals running up and down." Okay, so this is a stereotype of Africa, a big jungle place where, full of animals, wild animals. There still is some sort of stigma. You would still get the vibes that you are different, the vibes that you're not fully accepted. You would still get the vibes that people look at you differently. When you meet students for the first time, they give you this feeling that you are from a less civilized place. And this student says, I may come from a developing country, but then they kind of overplay that in their head. So they feel like you shouldn't know as much as they do. You shouldn't speak as well as they do. Yep. And in the labor market, another area of discrimination and othering. So when it comes to work, they treat you differently. You find out if you're white, you get certain types of jobs. If you're black, you get certain types of jobs. If you're black and you go and register with an agency, what is easier for you is to get to become a cleaner or a kitchen porter. But if you're white, they'll send you to the bar or serve. Yeah, it's clear. Well, they would pretend as if they're doing it fairly, but it's not like that. Strong feelings about labor market discrimination, lots of data and quotes on that. There is also that recognition of white privilege and base disadvantage. So being white, the student says you are born into a certain privilege, a certain class where you are able to achieve and you are mingling where you put yourself. Okay, this goes also with Bourdieu. You are given a head start to start within our industry. A student studying, is in acting. It's like that. The majority of the industry is white, so there is that unspoken easiness. They just get along with each other a lot more. I don't know how to explain it. I believe it would be easier if I were a white middle class home student from the UK. I wouldn't be worried so much. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't have to worry about so many things I worry about now. All right, this would bring me to some of my conclusions and then implications. So, based on my findings and analysis, I concluded that the Black African international students' lived experiences is a function of the possession of capitals that is demanded by the UK higher education field, lower expectations and multiple racialized domination, as I've tried to demonstrate through those quotes, and their overall experience is fraught with a lack of acceptance, and they are positioned as a lacking outsider who is admitted to the institution, but not really truly included and accepted in the true sense of the word. They experience racism and othering from home white students and also black students, home black students, and other non-white internationals. I have so many data which I haven't presented it here, and members of the community in various social settings, both inside and outside the university. So universities, institutional structures and practices, such as seminar groups, the predominantly white teaching population, the Eurocentric curriculum, newer assessment methods, these were unfortunately found to be sites of further disadvantage or racialized discriminatory treatment. So by so doing, they reproduce existing inequalities and also unequal power dynamics. The intersection of capital, race, and ethnicity, so that's where I come. I'm insisting that there's a need for an intersectional lens. If you want to look at the experience of black students or students from ethnic minority backgrounds, I'm recommending this. So I'm saying, for example, Bourdieu has helped me to explore, okay, and work out how, in comparative terms, white home students' possession of capitals demanded, along with their race being white and their previous UK education here, serves them as embodied symbolic capital, okay, that resides in the mastery of what Bourdieu calls symbolic resources, which is based on knowledge and recognition. And that embodiment helps them, and that is misrecognized as merit, okay, and capital when it actually is not. And CRT helped me to explore and unearth how this embodiment of symbolic capital and the recognition afforded to it, okay, by the universities is actually enmeshed with racialized discrimination through low expectation, prejudicial treatment, and overt and covert racism and othering. I conclude that research and scholarship on the lived experience of Black African international students or other ethnic minorities living and studying in the West must of necessity use analytical lens that foreground race and racism for a just and complete analysis. It would be unethical to do that, not to do this, not to use, yeah, so I have a couple of slides, implications. So this, calls for a rethink of curriculum, teaching staff recruitment strategies, because, they haven't been able to, to be taught by Black teachers at all, task design, and the recognition of the salience of race in the lived experience. So when we say, for example, to rethink of curricula, I'm saying we need to include mandatory, not elective modules, for example, okay? And have a policy at institutional level or even at a country level that demands that students from all backgrounds must share high attainment. I don't know why policies can't demand that, okay? Because talent is everywhere, opportunity is not everywhere, okay? So there should be a policy asking, demanding that students from all backgrounds must share higher. It's unethical to talk about increasing access to ethnic minorities when they are not sharing high attainment. Universities need to acknowledge race and racism. That's the most important thing. Acknowledge how race and racism affects ethnic minorities, in this case, Black African international students' adjustment, and shape all aspects of their lived experience. That's what my findings show. And they need to place race consciousness at the center of institutional policy and practice, ensuring that considerations of race and racism are central and not marginal in universities' planning, design, implementation of any international policies. For example, all racism cases, as I said, went unchallenged and unreported because there is no system, or the system doesn't encourage that reporting. So that will be perpetuated. Implications: institute a system to regularly assess the racial climate for students within their campuses and take actions. It's impossible to fight racism by avoiding talking about it. Have policies that require the departments design academic tasks that inherently require students from diverse backgrounds to work together to achieve an educational objective that counts to their final grades. Because as I said, seminar groups and seminar sessions are not living up to expectation. So we need to fix that, allocate more resource and space for the formation of student societies. This is very important, so, at least for my research participants. That is how they get protection, much needed protection from loneliness, discrimination, and the preservation of their dignity, culture, and identity. Thank you very much for listening. I've finished. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, and thank you, Solomon. That was really profoundly important presentation. And what you've done is you put race right at the center of our thinking about international education, and that's absolutely overdue. I mean, it's a double challenge, it seems to me. There's the practical issues related to, the welfare of international students, and you've very successfully said to us that there's a double othering process, othering as international students and othering in terms of race. And while I think that has been developed to some extent by Jenny Lee in the United States, for example, I think you've put it really squarely. But the other thing I think is your theoretical challenge, the way in which you've shown us that the tools that have been developed for class analysis at a national level, Bourdieu in particular, the one we use the most, don't translate easily into considering international and global issues where race is foregrounded as in the process of othering. I mean, what international students, non-white international students experience is a process of a inclusion-exclusion binary, where they're essentially defined as different in an inferior or in some way in deficit. And that's very profound and central to the whole experience. And all of your empirical evidence is showing us that it permeates the experience. So it's a direct challenge, theoretically and practically. Now, in relation to the theory problem, I mean, you've wrestled with this, I think, in a pretty interesting way, but not finally concluded what the way forward is. I mean, the capitals notion in Bourdieu creates a deficit notion, that you lack capitals, therefore, and that creates the inferior superior dichotomy in itself, doesn't it? and so and maybe cultural and social capital, we might think of them in terms of whiteness. You know, I say whiteness constitutes a form of cultural and social capital, and being outside whiteness excludes you from that, the acquisition of those capitals. I mean, that's one way to think about it. I think we might also want to think about international versus national here, and think about the international environment as a kind of neo-imperial environment in international education, so that the Anglo-American supremacy in international education is rests on white supremacy. I mean, it's one aspect of Anglo-American power in the world, and this is now centrally challenged by Black Lives Matter and the counter-racist aspect of you know, what's happening in the world at the moment. I mean, the weakening of American power, I think, is allowing a lot of other things to come forward now, and recognition that the political economic supremacy of the Anglo-American countries is linked to their claims about racial supremacy is a really important thing to do. So, but I think you know, there's a theoretical terrain there that we still need to flesh out and develop, and we have to go, it seems to me, beyond Bourdieu to do that. Now, I don't know whether you want to comment on that, but we've got a lot of people on the call list, so perhaps I should bring in some people. Hongwei has been talking to us through the chat, and I think he might be our first, you know, our first speaker. Hongwei, can you come in? Do you want to ask a question? Hongwei, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, yes. I have a question to Solomon regarding the kind of, as Simon said, this white supremacy that's on the rise in America. I'm just asking about, do you know, do you think what the US government can do to help improve the social capital of those Black African students, as you mentioned, in their universities?
Yep.
Solomon, do you want to, perhaps we might get some more questions, I think, because you've got a lot, you've got about 12 people who want to talk to you, and we've only got about 15 minutes left. So I might take some more questions, colleagues. And So-Young Lee is the second one on the list. So-Young?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Solomon, for your presentation and sharing your insights. I'm So-Young Lee, a DPhil student at University of Oxford. I really liked your presentation, and especially I really agreed with you with the point that the literature regarding international students as a mass without considering their individual, like ethnic or cultural differences. So my question is about your findings in relation with other studies on other groups of international students. So I was wondering, what were distinctive features in Black African international students' experiences which have not been found among other international students? Because apparently race and racism is also important factors and experienced by, for example, Asian students. So are you suggesting that racism affects other ethnic background international students as much as it does to Black African international students? And what do you mean by extra adjustment challenges? Was it compared to international students with other ethnic backgrounds?
Yeah, now before you come in, Solomon, save that question. I'll bring in a couple more. I mean, people are asking you, I think, about the distinctions, comparison between the position of international students from Africa and other international students, and they're also asking about the comparison between the experiences of Black students from as international students and Black students as domestic students. So those two comparisons are coming through. Lee Rensimer is our next questioner.
Hi, Solomon. Lovely to see you again. A great presentation. Thank you. So my comment, actually my question is, it dovetails from So-Young's and Simon's comments. So it's the same thing. not necessarily about comparing experiences of racism, but I wanted to understand how you theorize specifically Black African experiences of racism using CRT, and what is it specifically about Black bodies, and how does that fit into your theories, how you talk about whiteness and institutional racism?
Now, Solomon, I'll bring in Kimberly Aparicio. Kimberly, are you there?
I am, sorry, I'm happy to pass. My question was inconsequential and there's a queue. Thank you.
Can we bring in Peace Akuwudiki? Peace, are you there?
Yes, I'm an Mfil student at St. Mary's, and thank you, Solomon, for the presentation. I'm happy to see a Black man as a professor at your level. I'm really happy about that because I'm also looking at the experiences of Black women academics in the UK universities, early career researchers. So I want to ask, did you consider comparing the experiences of home students, Black home students to Black international students?
Good, we'll take one more, Solomon, and then give you the chance for an extended reply. David Killick. David, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here if you can hear me.
We can.
Yeah, great. So it's just an extension of the questions that have been asked really about where we cut this cake and who is exhibiting and who is experiencing racism. And it was really, the extension was, did you find any difference or similarities between the experiences of your participants when among other international students and when among domestic students?
Okay, it's over to you, Solomon. If you can recover those questions, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, the first question is the most difficult. Hongui asked me, yeah, what the US government can do to help black students in the US. I don't know. It's very difficult to speak on behalf of the US government. The first thing they could do is probably ease the visa restriction and allows them to come in. Yeah, but there are so many policies that they need to consider, whether it's the US government or any other government, if they are really truly interested in the true potential of international education. There's a lot more support that they need to give administratively in terms of visa, and after they arrived there. Okay, and you know, the invitation is so intense from universities in the West for international students to come to their country. But I've always argued that there is a lot more to a good party than just sending out the invitations. You know, you need to think about lots of other things. And once the students arrive, what happens there? You know, in terms of their integration transition, lots of policy considerations can be there. The second question, I think most of the questions are related with that. What is distinctive about Black African international students, and how is that different from the experience of other international students? Yeah, you know, they share, Black African international students share lots of things with other international students experience, but what really you know, distinguishes them from the rest is they suffer multiple racialized discrimination. It's not just that they're Black, they are Black Africans, which is totally different things. Wanting to be a Black British, Black Caribbean, Black African. Then there is all stereotypes associated with Africa, you know, the continent itself, like the hot desert country where needy people live, third world marginality. Okay, they're seen as people coming from third world, hungry people. You know, there are direct attacks and words as far as that's concerned. And their visibility, you know, the accent, physical visibility, the skin color, all this exacerbates their disadvantages. And they face an extra adjustment challenge, even more than other international students. Okay, the racism and the discrimination is so intense. Of course, Asian international students face a lot of discrimination and racism. Okay, but I don't think they're treated, for example, as students who have come from a very poor country, desert place, you know, all that stereotype associated with being African historically and contemporaneously. I think it was Lee who asked me about, you know, what is it new about these black bodies, and you know, what is the way forward and how critical race theory can deal with it. This is an issue that I'm still grappling with. I've even suggested in my thesis the need for an Afri-crit, okay, because critical race theory has been diversified. So you have this crit dealing with disability, and that crit dealing with Latinos, people's experiences. And I'm suggesting there should be an Afri-crit, because the kind of discrimination, oppression, racism Black African bodies experience is so intense and very deep and different in many different ways. So there can be a scholarship dedicated to, you know, an offshoot of critical race theory that we might call Afri-crit. So it's an idea that I'm just grappling with. I don't have any ready-made answer for that. And did you consider comparing Black home students to Black African students? That is what I'm trying to do now. That's my next step, not in my thesis, but there are parts of my data that really touched upon that. Okay, there are cases where Black British home students, you know, not all, but a significant number, did not show solidarity with a Black African, because one of my research participants, for example, had his open, overt racist attack from a Black British barber, where he went for a haircut. Okay, he was in tears when he was sharing that with me. Okay, he was even more deeply hurt by the racism he experienced from a Black British student than he experienced from white British people, because he expected some solidarity. He went there for a haircut. He initiated a conversation because he thought that was a space where he can make some connections, okay, and share whatever you know, sufferings he has had during his time at the university. But he faced something. You know, he called him a slave. Okay, he called him, you know, directly a slave, and he was crying. So that is an area where we need, you know. And on the other part, some of my research participants, one coping mechanism is to claim that it is not my struggle. It is a struggle of local British Black people, not my struggle. So there are lots of issues to consider there, and that's an area I'm really working on now and trying to do further research. Yeah, did I answer all of that?
Not bad, Solomon. You've got another cast of thousands queued in a line waiting to ask questions as well. And can I bring in Audley Graham to do so? Audley, you've been talking a lot in the chat. You've got a question as well. No? Can I go to Carla Lopez? Carla.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Solomon. Really nice to see you and to hear the whole thesis coming to shape. But I did a lot about my research is also about this. And so what I was wondering is if you have any good things to tell us about the experiences of this group, because I think as many of the people in the chat has already said as well, they look at, it seems that there's also a lot of the sentiments of loneliness and adaptation that in general international students face. And also if you've looked at identities, because I think for my own research, one of the main findings was that the identities were quite different, even from students from a specific place. I looked at specifically Mexican students. So even when they are not just Mexican, they have different identities depending on the regions that they come from. And in this case, Africa is also incredibly big and diverse in its own right. So, but yeah, did you find something positive, nice experiences, and how they relate to each other as well in positive ways, and how they were able to relate to this otherness in the international settings in positive ways? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. Yeah, as I mentioned slightly, it was the teaching that came as overwhelmingly very positive experience. So despite indicating that the teaching is new and unfamiliar to them. The large majority of the students enjoyed the teaching, and their most positive experience comes from, the classroom, teachers and teaching. That is very, very true. And as far as relationship is concerned, their positive experience comes, their relationship with other international students from all over the world. So their best friends, the help and solidarity, the support they received come from other international students from Asia, the Arab world, and some good experience with home students too, but overwhelmingly negative as far as white home students and my research participants is concerned. So teaching was positive, and the relationship with other international students was also very, very positive.
Solomon, I'm really pushing the time envelope here, but I'd like to bring in 2 more questions, if they can be brief, and then give you the final right of reply.
Okay.
Alil Cohen, please. Hello, Alil.
Hello, hiya. Yeah, so my question was, what do you think the scope and the kind of need is for research into kind of group pedagogical experiences is? So you mentioned in one of the implications that we need to find ways of conducting work and assessment which is group-based and which explicitly and deliberately brings people together from different backgrounds. And my experience, I think that's been brilliant, just in my own kind of observations. So I'm really supportive of that. So I'd like to hear you, basically, if you've got any more thoughts on that. Thanks very much.
Solomon, I'll bring in Sarah D'Souza for the last question. Sarah, are you there, please?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my question really was, you mentioned, Solomon, that newer assessment types had been problematic and had further disadvantaged Black African international students, or at least they'd highlighted that. And I'm just wanting to know a little bit more about that, because often within universities, when we're looking at curricular reform, assessment is something that we do look to deliver on some of that change. So if we're looking to newer methods, but actually maybe that's a disadvantage, I'd just like to understand that a bit better.
All right. Thank you. I'll react to these 2 very briefly. The first question is about the pedagogy, the group work. Okay, I'm teaching a pedagogy module at the moment, and it all goes down to task design. So we need to invest a lot in designing a task that truly and inherently requires for people to come together to work it out. We can throw any task and ask people to do it together, but if the task does not require any group interaction, we're not going to succeed. So that needs an investment on the parts of scholars, teachers, to sit down and work out tasks that really require people to contribute so that the task can be successfully accomplished. That much I can say at the moment. Newer assessment types, that's also a very good question, because as far as my research participants are concerned, for example, writing, coursework are things that are completely new. And as you very well know, coursework, written submissions are things that you are, slowly socialized into that culture, because it's even discipline specific. So they did not have that chance, to be acquainted, to be familiar with some forms of assessment. And we are expecting, the universities are expecting, not expecting, demanding, that they have skills which they did not offer in any way. It's not that they can't learn it. They can learn it. They're highly adaptable people, highly successful. Most of these students with terrible experience have finished with, all of them, I think, with a 2-1 and above. I followed many of them after the interview, but they have not been given the chance and the opportunity, to familiarize themselves. So for some students, coursework, you talk about coursework in the UK, for example, even in secondary schools, these students have never been asked to write more than a few sentence level. Some of them until they come here. So we need to really seriously consider that, and we shouldn't see assessment as that's the way we see it at the moment, as technical, value-free, objective technology, which it is not. There is a lot of subjectivity in the design and in the marking, in judging student work, and that recognition, I think, would help us to design better assessments.
Well, Solomon, we've reached the end of our time, but I want to warmly thank you for your contribution to our thinking today. You had a good audience, good participant audience, and tremendous activity going on in the chat. Real interest everywhere in your presentation. What you've done for us is emphasize the centrality of race in hierarchy and domination and education, and in international education in particular. And you've also shown us that we need to better theorize the relationship between class and imperialism and coloniality and race, and acknowledge that it's not just about unequal political economy. Domination and power is about cultural hierarchy as well, and that's often a profoundly important tool of domination. So, and I think developing a better theoretical framework there and integrating that into our research on international education, I mean, that's clearly a next task for us, and you've helped a lot with that. So I hope you'll be back on the show in future, and participating in all our webinars. And let me invite you all to be with us again on Thursday, where we have another post-political economy kind of presentation. Christopher Newfield, who writes about universities, is going to pose the question, do contemporary societies need universities? Notes on higher education after the knowledge economy. We might also be after the pandemic. But we look forward to seeing you then. And once again, Solomon, thank you very much indeed.
You're most welcome.
Bye for now.
Yeah, thank you. Bye for now.